Wales. Andy has been a great asset since joining the Tom Brock Bequest Committee several years ago. He's kind of one of those wonderful link people between researchers and records. And we need more of these sort of people because Andy knows reader services and records, but he's also a researcher. So he understands what we do, and he's an editor, and he and Andrew produced this marvellous volume that we've got today. And he works with the records, so he's been a great asset with the Tom Brock collection in the State Library, and in his abstract he talks about the work that's being done with the Davis Sporting Collection, making that more accessible to people like us who need it. We all need a person like Andy. So the first part of his title could almost be said of him, my good comrade on the rugby league. But it's not that, it's discovering the writings of Harry Sunderland in the State Library of New South Wales. So you're welcome, my good comrade, to the podium.
Well, thanks for those kind words, Richard. It's great to be here on such a significant day. It feels like it's 19 Tom Brock lectures rolled into one. That's wonderful. Okay, so my topic is Harry Sunderland, a controversial figure in the history of rugby league football. While he never actually played the game, he made his name as a manager, administrator and broadcaster over a period of 5 decades. From Brisbane to Wigan and from Melbourne to LA, we can find evidence of the rugby league controversies that Sunderland created and left behind. But my focus today is a bit Sydney-centric. Okay, I'll be taking a look at Harry's life and works and then concentrating on 20 years' worth of letters that Harry wrote to John Corbett Davis of Sydney's best-loved sporting newspaper, The Referee. These writings are supplemented by some of Harry's writings for newspapers, and I'm also using some photos from our Tom Brock collection, which is now safely in the State Library of New South Wales. Okay, it's not meant to be a comprehensive study of Harry Sunderland's life. More, it's an exercise in using a recently uncovered source to discover more about the man and his motives, in the hope of adding to the body of information already known about Harry. It would take more than a short talk to tell Harry's story because it's full of complexities, contradictions and radical career changes. If there are any publishers in the audience, come and talk to me later. I think it's worth a whole book. Okay, just Harry Sunderland in a nutshell. He was born in Gympie, Queensland, 1889, and his sporting career was basically limited to things like road running. His first job was as a journalist with the Toowoomba Chronicle. But by 1913 he was secretary of the Queensland Rugby League, a position he would occupy on and off until 1938. All the while Harry plied his journalistic skills, contributing articles to newspapers on league, union and the Olympics. He accompanied the Kangaroos on 4 tours of England as a journalist in 1921-22 and then as co-manager in 1928-29, 33-34 and 37-38. He's best known in England for the brief, stormy time he spent in 1938 as a manager of Wigan. And he stayed on in England after that, like after the war, as a journalist and broadcaster. He died in Manchester in 1964, aged 74. And we have 2 awards now named in his honour. There's the Harry Sunderland Medal in Australia, which is awarded to the best Australian Test player in an Ashes series, last won by Petro Civoniceva. And we have the Harry Sunderland Trophy, which is awarded to the best player in the Super League Grand Final, which was won last month by Lee Smith of Leeds Rhinos. Okay. Harry's long and varied career featured many twists and turns. Here are a few of the more surprising positions held by Sunderland. At one stage he was secretary of the Queensland Cricket Association while concurrently secretary of the QRL. While in exile from the QRL, he established the Victorian Rugby League and got a Melbourne competition off the ground with 6 clubs. And while he was based in Melbourne, he somehow wrangled his way onto the Australian Olympic Council as it prepared for the 1924 Paris Olympics. That kind of surprised me. I mean, a man involved in professional sports somehow getting his way onto the amateur, peak sporting body for amateurs. So, okay, and speaking of amateur sports, while in England, I've found evidence of Harry sending letters back to to Davis, where he was enclosing articles on rugby union. So he was secretly covering union as well. Okay. Secondary sources tend to say quite a bit about Harry Sunderland's personality. Ian Heads has called Harry bumptious and irrepressible. Malcolm Andrews referred to him as an eccentric, and both Andrews and Edmund Scott revealed the nickname given to Sunderland by touring Kangaroo players, the Little Dictator. Tony Collins famously wrote that Harry's enthusiasm for promoting rugby league was matched only by his eagerness to promote himself. So as you'll see, Harry was quite a complex and perhaps sometimes misunderstood character. Okay, so what I'm about to show you is a recently discovered collection at the State Library of New South Wales. The Mitchell Library, which is the Historic Australiana collection at the State Library, is famous for its collections of personal papers of iconic Australians. So we have things like Lachlan Macquarie's papers, Matthew Flinders, Henry Lawson and Miles Franklin. But for sports historians, one of the big draw cards is the personal collection of a lesser known Australian, and that's John Corbett Davis. J.C. Davis is remembered as one of Australia's greatest sports writers and editors. At the height of his powers, J.C. Davis edited 3 Sydney newspapers, all with the rich sporting content. There was the Referee, the Arrow and the Sunday Times. He contributed articles to those papers as well under pen names The Cynic for rugby league and rugby union and Not Out for cricket. When J.C. Davis's vast collection of sporting programs, scrapbooks, photos and correspondence was purchased from his son in 1976, the Mitchell Library already had one Davis sporting collection, and that was the one purchased in 1916 from the widow of J.C.'s brother, who was a Herald sports editor, Joseph John Davis. So we came to call J.C.'s collection the Davis Sporting Collection number 2. Its correspondence files were grouped into several boxes marked miscellaneous and basically sat there for years. It's only been in the past decade or so that they've been made more accessible to researchers. And it's now possible to search our manuscripts catalogue online and find out that the Davis collection has letters from people such as Don Bradman, Bob Menzies, and over 30 letters from Harry Sunderland. And I've chosen to show you a small sample of those today. Okay, so our earliest letter from Harry Sunderland was written in 1920 on the letterhead of the Queensland Cricket Association. Harry writes that the QCA ground, the Gabba, is well patronised, but he complains about the quality of the ground. He writes, "It seems that there will be few real improvements until we get a new board of trustees composed of younger men who are intimately connected with cricket, football and other sports. I do sincerely hope that the dry bones and the elderly gentlemen of the Brisbane Cricket Ground will have either been removed or rejuvenated in their ideas long before another international cricket or football side visits Brisbane." Harry is also excited about the 1921 rugby league season, saying it's going to be a hummer. He then moves into political mode, lobbying for a manager position on the coming Kangaroo Tour. He writes, "Speaking privately, and not for publication in any way, I am still keen on being appointed as one of the 2 joint managers of the next Aussie Rugby League team to England. If there are any kind words that you can justifiably say regarding me during the cricket season and my work for the game here, it may help to boost my chances. I am tempted to take the view that modesty is a big handicap rather than a virtue in these matters." So we're already starting to see the character that Harry Edgar calls Harry the Hustler. Okay. Now, if Davis did write any kind words about Sunderland in Referee that summer, they didn't help to achieve Sunderland's aim, because S.G. Ball and Billy Cann were chosen as managers of that tour. But Harry Sunderland tagged along anyway, so he was a reporter for the Brisbane Sun on that tour, and still somehow made the official tour photo. Okay. Harry laments about not writing for the Referee because that newspaper already had a correspondent for that tour who was halfback Duncan Thompson. Some of Duncan Thompson's letters also survive in the Davis Sporting Collection, and he was a fantastic writer. He also wrote for the Referee. He had a weekly column, and it's really worthwhile. I think he's probably worth a whole separate paper. So next conference, Duncan Thompson. Okay. There are obvious tensions on tour between Sunderland and the official tour managers. For example, Thompson makes mention of the Harry Sunderland incident in one of his letters, but doesn't actually go on to say what happened. So I guess much like today, what happens on tour stays on tour. Okay. And A later Sunderland letter from that tour takes a swipe at the manager's ball and can. He says, "The managers clearly lack the power of inspiration, and they have not risen to the occasion and made the players a happy family. I should imagine from the players' attitude that they will be able to speak for themselves in the right quarter at the right time, and after all, I have not made this trip as a player's spokesman in their affairs of disappointment." The Kangaroos had travelled via California en route to England, and Harry made some early investigations into taking the game to the US. He hoped to find, as he says, sufficient in Frisco to warrant an article on league as the game for the English-speaking races of the Pacific, Aussies, Marylanders and Americans. Okay, now fast forward to the next Kangaroo Tour, 1929-30. So now Harry is a tour manager alongside Lorne Dargan. This tour employed a coach for the first time, and that was Arthur Hennessy. The series is best remembered for the scoreless third test, in which Joe Chimpy Bush had the famous try in the corner in the dying moments disallowed, and Australia's greatest chance to win the series was dashed. Our only letter from this tour is one that Harry wrote after the third test. He refers to earlier letters that apparently hadn't survived. Referring to the third test, he writes, "Our boys have done wonderful. It's not sporting to squeak, but Bush will never forget his incident in the corner. Still, Gorman has been wonderful and the team has not disgraced us." So we'll jump ahead to the next Kangaroo Tour, 1933-34. So Harry was co-manager along with Wally Webb. And in this photo you can see the two managers on either side of the captain, Frank Skinny McMillan. On this tour, Sunderland and Webb sent typed circulars back home to the rugby league authorities and to the media back in Australia. The tone of these circulars is more formal, as they're meant for a wider audience, and the entire contents could have been possibly published, so there's not as much gossip as in Harry's private letters. But there is some stinging criticism of the players after the first tour match, a 13-9 win against St Helens. He says, "Old players who view the match consider the Australians lack speed. We who recall Horder, Frawley, Blinkhorn, Waring, Stunts and others at their best know this. Some of our players disappointed very much, and they appeared to lack a resolute will and to hesitate with nervousness. We are hoping to improve very much on this form." The scoreboard shows that the form did not improve very much, and Australia lost the Test series to Great Britain 3-0. One bright spot, though, was the first rugby league match played on French soil, an exhibition match held on New Year's Eve in Paris, in which Australia defeated England 63-13 in the ice and snow. Harry liked to claim responsibility for helping to spread the game to France, although these claims have been disputed by historians such as Tony Collins. Okay, I discovered a flyer which was written in French that was signed by Harry and forwarded to J.C. Davis. The rugby union authorities in the British Isles had banned matches against France because of allegations of payments to top French players. So this flyer aimed to recruit French players to professional rugby football and described rugby league as being faster, more open and more attractive than rugby union. The address provided at the bottom of this flyer is Marlborough House in Ilkley, Yorkshire, which was the Kangaroos' English headquarters. And then I found an article that Harry Sunderland wrote for the Brisbane Telegraph in March 34, which talks about the flyer and says that he sent it to sporting writers, rugby officials and every man associated with rugby in France whose name and address I could get. Harry had assisted the Rugby Football League to organise the New Year's Eve match in Paris, and then he offered to help the RFL to organise a French tour of England led by Jean Galliard in March 1934, but was told his services were not required. "I got the cold shoulder," he wrote. "After delaying consideration of my offer from January 11 to March 12, I have now learned that they consider it too late for me to be of assistance. Wonderful tacticians at playing the game of stalemate are those crafty old gentlemen. They can close up the game in the halls of management as cleverly as their players can close up the game in a cup tie or a test match." Okay. Sunderland sometimes sent Davis copies of documents that he thought would be of interest to the newspaper, or perhaps that he thought might portray him in a positive light. This one is part of a series of circulars that Sunderland, on behalf of the QRL, sent to Queensland's rep players in 1935. The idea was to fire them up for the coming 5-match series against New South Wales. "We need speed as well as stability. It takes weeks to develop the best form. What will you do about it?" he asked the players. Some of his own suggestions included to eliminate some of your pleasures and indulge in keen training, and reasonable hours to bed. Now, why he forwarded copies to J.C. Davis in a Sydney newspaper is anybody's guess, and not surprisingly, New South Wales won the series 4-1. Okay, and Harry accompanied the 1937-38 Kangaroos as co-manager alongside Bob Savage, and the State Library happens to have Bob Savage's scrapbook from that tour as well, which is a great source. It has all the newspapers of the tour, both of the English leg and the French leg. And Harry's 2 letters from this tour indicate that the team was happy and harmonious, if not successful, on the football field. Some of Australia's best players at that time, like Dave Brown, Heck G and Vic Hay, were unavailable for selection as they were already playing for English club sides. And key forward Joe Pearce had broken his leg during the New Zealand leg of the tour. Australia lost the Test Series 2-1, but had more success on the French leg of the tour, winning 9 from 10. And our photo here shows Harry Sunderland, who was introducing the team to Queen Mary. Okay. Sunderland wrote to Davis, quote, "Our boys have lost the real arts and finer points of the game as the Englishmen know them. There is a horrible lot of work ahead of us and some heartbreaks before we get home. I hate making comparisons, but I cannot compare this side with those of 1921 and 29, and so far they do not look like the 1933 side." On group dynamics, Sunderland wrote, "Bob Savage has been a good friend and we are a very happy combination, for which I have much to thank the great architect." Don't think he means Francis Greenway there. "The team is also a happy family as compared to some I've been with." Not mentioned in these letters are Sunderland's dealings behind the scenes in landing a contract with the Wigan Club, nor the furious exchange of cables between the tour managers and the rugby league authorities in Sydney about the tourist decision to return home a week later than the authorities wished. Savage lost his position at the NSWRL over this on his return, and Harry Sunderland returned briefly to his position at the QRL, but then when his latest venture, which was an attempt to arrange a French tour of Australia in 1938, failed, Harry set his sights on managing Wigan. Now, our first letter from the Wigan era comes from November 38. As you can see, it didn't take long for Harry to get his name on the letterhead. He's up there on the very top. And we happen to have 10 letters in this collection, which he wrote back from Wigan. And in this one, Harry's pushing for a Wigan tour of Australia and for a World Cup in Sydney. He says, "I need it now. I will not need it in the years to come. I need it now. If I can make a success at Wigan, it will establish me and help me have the goodwill and respect and reputation that will enable me to tackle London and elsewhere. If I fail, well, I never think of failure. But if I have to win without the aid of that invite to tour Australia and have a World Cup in late June or early July of 1939, then I suppose I can still win without the aid or help of the very people who will receive help themselves by helping me, and Wigan and rugby league football in general at the present time." He mentions moonlighting with regular columns for the Manchester Evening News and the Leeds Sports Post, and also broadcasting for the BBC. He says, "I have no need to worry about keeping the wolf from the door. Life has been kind to me, but I do want to see our rugby league game prospering and doing enterprising things." Naturally, controversy followed Harry to Wigan. Roy Francis, later a Great Britain rep and North Sydney coach, left Wigan suddenly while Harry was in charge. This was allegedly because Harry was unable to work with a black player. There was also debate in Australian newspapers as to whether Sunderland's appointment was a body blow to Wigan player coach Jim Sullivan. "Well, Jim has not acted as if it has," he says, "and I know that he was never in the running for the job I hold. Jim's given me a grand welcome and the heartiest cooperation in the methods I've introduced, and they're slowly bringing results with a team of players who had been condemned." The only on-field success Sunderland brought Wigan was in the Lancashire Cup of 1938-39. Harry was quite distraught about the failure to get the Wigan tour of Australia off the ground. Writing in April 1939, Harry says, "It would have been a glorious experiment and could not have been a bad flop." Now, one of my favourite letters is this one, which was written on the fly at the outbreak of World War II. "This old world has gone temporarily crazy again." And Harry didn't last much longer at Wigan. So this letter comes from December 39, when both Sunderland and Davis had lost their livelihoods. The referee had been closed down after 50 years as Sydney's specialist sporting newspaper, and Sunderland was no longer at Wigan. He writes, "You know that I finished with Wigan soon after the war caused the introduction of wartime conditions. They paid me a sum as compensation. But what can compensate one for unemployment? I had great dreams and plans in coming to England. Wigan was only in my mind as a stepping stone. Was he pushed or did he jump? I still need to get into Wigan's official records and local newspapers to get the full story. And the other day I just made contact with the oldest surviving player of Wigan, his son, this guy called Bowen, Jack Bowen, who's 93 years old, and I'm hoping that I'll get an answer from him about Harry's time at Wigan. Okay. Now, our final letter is a circular that Sunderland wrote to various Australian friends in April 1940. He writes of his finish with the Wigan club when the war broke out, and of the unhappy 6 or 7 months I spent with Wigan prior to the war, because after all the hard work I had done to secure the invitation to Wigan, to secure the invitation to Wigan to tour Australia, certain Wigan directors turned somersault and moved for the rescinding of their resolution to tour. He also addressed rumours in the Brisbane Telegraph that he was returning to Australia to take up a war appointment. Ye gods and little fishes, a war appointment! The war is on this side of the world and not 12,000 miles away. If there is any war work for me, approaching 51 years of age, to do, it is here on the spot. And this is where our collection of Harry Sunderland letters ends. J.C. Davis died a year later, while Harry Sunderland spent the rest of his life in England. Both had contributed enormously to the body of quality rugby league journalism. There are many gaps in the official records kept by the New South Wales Rugby League and the Queensland Rugby League, so the Harry Sunderland letters are a useful source to help plug those gaps in the period between the wars. We're fortunate that Harry Sunderland wrote so many letters to J.C. Davis, and that J.C. Davis was such a hoarder, and also that his son managed to give them to the State Library or sell them to the State Library after being in his garage for over 30 or 40 years. Okay, and of course these letters only tell one side of the story. They don't mention, for instance, the petty fines that Harry imposed on players on tour, or the whistle he carried around to summon players, as revealed by Ian Heads in his book The Kangaroos. Given today's dominant methods of communication, such as phones, texts and emails, I've serious doubts that we'll ever see a similar collection covering the rugby league of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and I gather we got our first offer of a conference paper for the next one.
Bring it on.
Time for questions.
Yes.
Two comments, probably, Andy. Recently, what's come to light, Harry Sunderland's sister had for many years ago gave a collection of his papers to the State Library. No one made the connection because of her married surname that she was Harry Sunderland's sister. Right. So they've come up and I haven't had a good look at them yet. I've had to bring down a disc with some copies of them tomorrow for one. So that may complement some of this stuff here. I don't know what era it covers, but...
So that's the State Library of Queensland?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Only found a few months ago, actually.
Right. And I found out fairly recently as well that Harry's son was quite famous. It's Sir Sidney Sunderland, who was a neurologist, and he plied his trade down in Melbourne. I think one of the unis there has his own papers. So I'm hoping there might be some letters back from Harry there.
And the second comment I've made was his association with the Olympic thing.
Sure.
While it appears strange, it's probably he was very much a friend of a person called Dave Carter, who was very much involved in amateur sport. And Dave Carter tried to roll Coombs, who was the previous speaker mentioned, and I suspect Carter's had to pay Harry back a few favours and pushed him onto the Olympic thing.
Oh, I owed him one. Right. Okay, thanks for that.
Right, there's one up there. Yep.
In light of your last comment, do you have any suggestions for the future in terms of archiving current tours?
That's a very good question. I mean, I know that there are ways of archiving emails, for instance, but when our culture is so kind of text, message-driven now, how do you capture that?
The other question I had was whether the library has any intention of making any of the Davis collection available online.
It's on the list. There's a very long list of things which we'd like to put online, and that's certainly there. And I'm particularly plugging for the Harry letters, of course, but amongst Davis there's about 9 boxes worth of really quality stuff. But we have to basically get in line behind all the iconic stuff, you know, like I mentioned earlier, things like Miles Franklin and Flinders. We've started putting those papers online, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to do a bit of sporting content as well. One other thing that has started is we've been putting photos online onto the Flickr collection online, you know, so you can actually search that. And the first one that went up the other month was of the first kangaroo team. So we'll be using those kind of methods as well.
Yeah.
Great.
I saw your man first. I was back afterwards.
I just wondered, as an Australian in England at that time, was he involved in assisting bringing players over to play in the English League?
Well, I haven't seen any evidence of that. One book, it might have been Ian Heads' book, mentioned that was thought at one stage, but we don't have any proof of it. It's quite likely because at that time, like in the 30s, there were so many Aussies playing in England, so you think somebody like you might have been involved. But then again, it's to the detriment of rugby league over here if we've got the Aussie guys playing in England because they can't play rep football then. So I'm not too sure. Yeah.
Right. It's just very interesting how he's depicted as a very controversial character, and you know, right through his entire life, responsible for actually the formation of the Brisbane Rugby League because people were so hostile towards the dictatorial attitude of the Queensland Rugby League that they formed the Brisbane Rugby League. So you had the Brisbane Rugby League running a competition and the Queensland Rugby League running a competition from about 22 to 29 or even 33 to 33. So an extremely interesting character, and I'm just a bit intrigued. What happened around? I just lost a bit of the way he went through there. In 22, did he go? In 22, well, that was when the Brisbane Rugby was formed, and I think he was secretary of the QRL. But then I think he may have left just soon after.
That's right. There was some kind of parting of the ways after the Kangaroo tour when he came back. Then he spent time in Melbourne getting the VRL set up, and I'm not too sure what actually happened there. Like, but he was there for about 2-3 years. And then he ended up back at the QRL after that. So, reconciliation.
Right. Yeah, just interested in what you said about Roy Francis there.
Oh, yes.
Is there evidence of his attitude to Roy Francis in the letters?
Well, I've only seen it in secondary sources, so the actual letters don't even talk about Roy Francis at all. But from what I've seen, for instance, in writings of Tony Collins, you know, I've seen things about, well, they often say that it was rumoured, you know, that he had a hostile attitude towards black players. So.
Yeah, there's one up there, and then one more, and then that one here.
Hi, Andy, just a query, it might possibly be answered by the gentleman sitting next to me as well.
Oh, yeah.
One of my interests is the French Tour of 51. My understanding is that Len Barlow, gentleman, filmed some of the games. The test series in 51, the very famous test series against the French.
Wow.
And he took those films with him in 54 to the US as part of his pilgrimage to try and push the development of the game in the US. I'm just wondering if anyone knows what's happened to that footage, because as I understand it,